This video is a follow-up video to the close reading of the poem Those Winter Sundays by Robert Hayden. So if you haven't watched that video, I encourage you to go back and watch that video and then come to this video. In this video, we're going to look at how we choose different pieces of factual data from a poem to support an argument. And in that previous video with the Hayden poem, that looks at how we make inferences as we're reading the poem. So the poem is My Papa's Waltz, and what I'd like to do is I'm going to read through the poem, and then we're going to talk about three possible arguments that this poem could be making. There could be more, but just to keep this video short, I left it at three, and we'll talk about how we're going to pull out different pieces of textual data or factual data from the poem to help support an argument that we would like to make. Okay, so My Papa's Waltz. The whiskey on your breath could make a small boy dizzy. But I hung on like death. Such waltzing was not easy. We romped until the pan slid from the kitchen shelf. My mother's countenance could not unfrown itself. The hand that held my wrist was battered on one knuckle. At every step you missed, my right ear scraped a buckle. You beat time on my head with a palm caked hard by dirt, then waltzed me off to bed, still clinging to your shirt. Okay. So you probably made a series of inferences as you were reading that, and those inferences might lead you to one of these three arguments. Perhaps you have a completely different idea, and that's absolutely fine. We want to talk about how we would make our assertion about what we think the poem means, and then we have to back that up with factual data. So the three ones that I listed here is that this poem could be suggesting that this loving father. Another argument could be that it's an abusive father. And then a final argument could be that the poem is a metaphor of childhood life with an alcoholic. So let's look at that first argument. So the argument that this poem suggests that the father's a loving father. So some of the textual data we might pull out then would be the verbs romped and slid. Those are happy verbs. The pans just slide, they don't crash, right? So always think about what other words could have been used. So what else could have Roethke said there? Instead of slid from the kitchen shelf, he could have said crashed from the kitchen shelf. Instead of romped, he could have said, romped is a very playful word, right? So he could have chosen something that would indicate kind of more tension. So this seems like this is a happy interaction. In the stanza with the mother's not angry, right? So if this was an abusive poem, the mother would be angry, but she's not angry here. Perhaps she's just perpetually disappointed. The word countenance just indicates one's facial expression, so it couldn't unfrown itself. And then, also think about the fact that it's removed. It seems a little bit non-personalized, that the mother doesn't seem to have agency in this, where the mother doesn't seem to be in control of her actions there. It's her face can't unfrown itself, so there's some sort of distance there with the mother. And maybe we get this notion from that the mother approves, at least very tacitly, she seems to be approving. She doesn't stop the romping that's going on in her kitchen. And keep in mind that the setting here, where does this poem take place? It's in the kitchen, and the kitchen is usually the mother's domain or the wife's domain. So there's that element in the poem as well. The speaker and the father are dancing, so it's this idea of the waltz, right? They're dancing. The very end of the poem, the father puts the boy to bed, so that would be an act that a loving father would do, and the boy clings on to him. And then the tone, it's a quick tempoed and kind of energetic tone, so maybe that's another kind of piece of factual data from the poem that would indicate that this is a loving relationship. The second argument then would be the exact opposite, so that this is an abusive father. And if that was the argument you were making about the poem, you would focus on the intensity of the drinking, that the father is so drunk that just the smell of the breath makes the boy dizzy. So that would be one element that you'd take a look at. Then the diction choices, when we just kind of let our eyes kind of glance through this poem, we see words like death and battered and beat and hard. Those are all really kind of abusive and very negative word choices. So we want to think about those. The verb choices, hung on and clinging, that seems very desperate and very I guess I'll just leave it at that. Desperate. Those seem like very desperate in what's going on with those things. This dance, if that is what it is very intense, so intense that pans fall. And so you would make some sort of inference there that this is not really a dance, but rather this is some sort of abuse. The line, the hand that held my wrist, there is a sense of authority there, that the father has authority over the child, the hand that held my wrist. It's a little bit non-personalized as well. It doesn't say my father's hand held my wrist, but the hand that held my wrist. And we get the sense that these two, this isn't kind of an equally engaged dance, but one person has control over the other. And then that idea that the ear scrapes every step you missed, the ear scraped. So that would be some of the textual evidence that you could use to support that second argument of the abusive father. Finally, another argument we could make is saying that this poem is a metaphor of what it is like for a child to be living with an alcoholic parent. So the desire for the child to receive love, any type of love. So that idea, clinging and held on. And so this child just kind of clings to any type of interaction, even if it seems to be negative interaction, the child clings to that, that notion of kind of connection or love. The complexity of the interaction, so that it's a rough kind of situation, but you still hang on to it. That language, and I think we get this a lot with this colon, right? But I hung on like death. Colon is always that indication of kind of an announcement, or I like to say the bugle horn, dun 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 dun. And here it is, such waltzing is not easy. And the language such waltzing implies that there are other types of interactions, but this type of interaction was not easy. And so it indicates commitment, right? That this is the type of dance that's not easy to do, but this person is committed to doing it. So the boy's committed to doing it. The line, at every step you missed. So at every step you missed, my right ear scraped a buckle. Of course, that indicates that the boy suffers from the father's mistakes. The father missteps and the boy has to kind of physically pay for that. But this also might be working on a metaphorical level. So every step might be referencing to all the different interactions or different ways that the father tried maybe to have a relationship with the son, but every step it was that there was some sort of consequence that was a negative effect on the boy. The line beat time indicates that you beat time on my head. Beat time indicates that time with the father is difficult. Still clinging suggests that the boy is desperate for contact with, even though it might be negative, it's desperate for that contact with the father. Remember that this is a waltz, right? So we would say, what are the implications of the dance? So why call it waltz? Why not some other type of dance? But it's a waltz. And so those of you who are familiar with waltzing, and then those of you who aren't, it's a very complex dance in which you have to anticipate the partner's move and you have to make sure that you're ready to respond to that. And so that waltzing could be kind of a metaphor as well for how a child deals with an alcoholic parent, always kind of aware of what's anticipating what the parent's going to be like and anticipating what the next move is. And then finally, we have the title. This is not a mutual dance. It is just the dance that the father has. So my papa's waltz. So that this is all about the interaction of, or the way that the father has chosen. And again, because we are talking about a kind of a child-parent relationship here, we get a sense of how small this kid is. My right ear scraped a buckle, so he barely makes it up to the father's waist. So that we have a sense here that there is something going on with the way the father has chosen to orchestrate the dance with the son, and that the son is still going to be a part of this dance regardless, because he wants the attention. So that's our kind of third and perhaps probably the most complex argument then, so that it's a metaphor for what it's like to be a child of an alcoholic. Okay, So again, similar to what I talked about in the Hayden poem, we want to make sure we rephrase as a generalization. So rather than keeping it isolated, kind of your thesis statement about this poem, don't make it isolated just to the specific instance. We want to bring it into more of a generalization. So rather than the speaker recounts the complex relationship with his alcoholic father, we would expand that and say Roethke suggests that children of alcoholics learn to navigate a complex dance. So we want to make sure we move it into a generalization as we move to the end. Okay, that's it. I hope this video gave you some ideas about how you would make different arguments and how your arguments will be supported by different parts of the poem. So different factual data to support different arguments. Okay, email me if you have questions.